The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Coming up straight ahead on Perspectives, we review the relationship between the United States, Israel, and Palestine, the conflict, and the president's recent speech. Coming up straight ahead, right here on Perspectives.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
What's on your mind? What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference.
What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
And hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Perspectives with yours truly, Darren Jaime. Our topic of discussion today is the recent debate concerning U.S., Palestine, Israel, the three countries, knowing full well that there's a recent speech by President Obama that's raised a lot of questions and turning a lot of heads. What is the Palestinian quest for statehood? How's it going to actually all play out? Well, we brought our political analyst who's here in studio. He's also an attorney as well as a professor at SUNY Maritime. You've seen him here on the show Open, and he's here with us on our Perspective show. We now are pleased to join Mark Meyritz, who's joining us here on Perspectives. Good to have you.
I'm very happy to be here, Darren.
Good, different kind of format, same kind of conversation though.
Looking forward to it.
Let's talk about this now. President Obama is really taking some heat in some corners in regards to his recent speech in regards to the Israel-Palestine statehood issue. Let's bring viewers who may not be so familiar up to where we are right now.
Well, you start with the speech. Let's do it that way. The president made a speech at the United Nations. It was much awaited. And he basically took the position that right now is not the time to declare a Palestinian state, but that the parties should go to the negotiating table and negotiate an agreement, a comprehensive agreement. And I think that is the right approach, actually, for reasons that we can flesh out and discuss.
Of course, but there's a lot of people who are saying, listen, the president shouldn't have came out and said, you know, this isn't the time, especially on the part of the Palestinians who are saying, this is why I'm here. Now is the time, Mr. President. And for them not to hear that, obviously, we know that they fired back with, you know, with their harsh criticism of the president.
Well, look, American policy is to have a two-state solution in the Middle East. That's been the policy of many presidents, not just President Obama. The question is, how do you implement two states? And that is really a conundrum, an extraordinarily complex issue. Right now, we have in Gaza, we have a government, well, I don't know if it's a government, I don't know what it is, but it's Hamas. I wouldn't want to dignify it by saying it's a government. It's a terrorist group that runs Gaza.
Terrorist leadership.
Terrorist leadership. And in the West Bank, we have the Palestinian Authority in charge. When President Abbas came with his desire to have a Palestinian state, he announced that the Palestinian state that he had in mind would be the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. And that is a no-starter from a legal point of view. It just doesn't work. The reason being that Hamas does not recognize President Abbas, and President Abbas has a very tortuous relationship with Hamas in Gaza. So he's proclaiming a state that could never be a state because it's basically in pieces. There is no one unitary state. To have a state under international law, you have to have a defined territory and a government and the capacity to enter into international relations. Now, if he's carving out in his map this configuration, it's not a starter because actually President Abbas, his term as president expired. And another person was supposed to succeed, the parliamentary leader, supported by Hamas. So Abbas is the president, but Hamas doesn't recognize him. So they're at odds. So this state that he's coming up with, it is not, it's not in everybody's agreement that there even would be such a state. Now, in actuality, Gaza could proclaim itself as a state, but it would be Hamas, the terrorists, in charge. The West Bank could proclaim itself as a state, but then it would be just the West Bank. What President Abbas is saying is, I want all of this. And plus the fact that the Oslo Accords that were entered into with the Palestinian Authority, with the sign-off by the United States, by EU, I mean, everybody signed off, basically said that the parties would not alter, would not seek to alter the negotiation framework and would work towards a negotiated solution. Instead, President Abbas comes to the United Nations and he wants to have a state now. And that is putting the cart before the horse.
But there is
not
a
workable.
legal basis for Palestinian statehood.
There is a legal basis for it based upon the negotiated accords. It's very important to remember that there's a lot of water under this bridge. It actually reminds me of a story which I should probably say because I'm going to forget it. It's the famous story of the scorpion and the frog. This is an Israeli writer had this some years ago. It goes something like this. The scorpion approaches the frog and says, I can't swim, as you know. Could I take a ride? I want to get across the water. And the frog says to the scorpion, well, now, if I give you a ride on my back, you're going to bite me and I'll die. The scorpion said, well, I'm not going to bite you. Of course, how am I going to get across the water? So the frog says, that's a good, okay, no problem, I get it. So the scorpion gets on the back of the frog and they're swimming and the frog is swimming. And in the middle of the water, in the middle of this lake, the scorpion bites the frog. And as they're sinking, as the frog is dying and they're drowning, the frog says to the scorpion, why did you do that? I mean, we're both going to die. The scorpion says, it's the Middle East. And that really personifies the whole destructive tendencies here that the parties have never been able to work this out. Many presidents have tried. The point, the bottom line is the parties themselves must negotiate. Plus, the points that they have to negotiate are not just declaring a state and then where do you go from here? That's completely backwards. And honestly, there are a lot of other issues. The right of return. Where is the right of return? To Israel or to the Palestinian state? What is the status of Jerusalem? What is going to happen with respect to terrorism? For example, in the case of Gaza, the Israelis themselves withdrew from Gaza. And this was a soul-wrenching event where Israeli troops went into Gaza and literally pulled the Israelis who were there out of Gaza. And as soon as that happened, Hamas basically took power there and started shooting rockets at Israel. Now, if there's going to be a Palestinian state in the West Bank, are there going to be artillery set up to shoot rockets from the West Bank? I mean, the rockets that are in Gaza cannot reach the heartland of Israel. But if rockets were set up in the West Bank, they could. The point being that the parties have to figure out how to create this. Everybody agrees that there has to be a solution because clearly we don't want the scorpion and the frog. We want to have the lamb and the sheep. We want to have the, that biblical analogy where we live in peace, of course.
Is there any possibility about the dissolution of Hamas? We've talked about, there's been a lot of talk that, Hamas is dying out. On some parts, people are saying, look, it's an organization that's seeing a steady rise. From your perspective, where do you see things going with Hamas?
Well, Hamas is empowered by a number of very important countries in the world, the least of which Iran, which is a backer of Hamas, and secondly, Turkey, which has embraced Hamas even more so than the Palestinian Authority. I mean, it was a very, very famous story that the Hamas leader went to Turkey and was embraced by the leadership in Turkey. But when Abbas came, he wasn't because Hamas is the flavor of the month from the point of view of the Iranians and the Turks and others. And so in terms of Gaza, the people in Gaza literally live in an open-air prison because they have no freedom there. If they speak against the government, they're arrested or they're executed or who knows what. So there is no freedom there. And frankly, it's a little bit hard to negotiate with a party, because there wouldn't be a negotiation with a party that has said in its charter that it's going to destroy you. You can't sit down on a table with someone that says, have a negotiation with them when their basic policy and their basic approach is, we're going to destroy you. And frankly, I wanted to add that they put their artillery in the middle of hospitals, in the middle of homes, so that the Israelis can't retaliate without killing civilians. I mean, it's an impossible situation.
Let's come back and talk a little bit more about this. We'll also take a look at the president's speech at the United Nations when we return right here on Perspectives with our guest, Mark Myritz.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
G-Morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did. Are you on your way to the mall? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
We can all be energy savers. It's easy. Turn off lights. Use energy-saving light bulbs. And turn off electronics and appliances when not in use. Make a change and we can really fly. Learn more at energy.gov/kids.
And welcome back to Perspectives. Darren Jaime here with you. Our guest in studio, Mark Myritz, who appears on our open show. He's a fraternity. He's also a political analyst and professor at SUNY Maritime. We're discussing the relationship between the United States, Israel, and Palestine. President Obama's recent speech at the United Nations still turning some heads, angering Palestinian leadership who is looking for statehood and looking for an endorsement pretty much from President Obama to give Palestinian statehood. The president saying it's time to go back to the negotiating table, possibly see statehood at a later date. That angered, of course, the Palestinians. And then also the president also speaking a little bit about Israel, letting the United States and the United Nations know that it is a firm supporter and its commitment to Israel. We do have a piece, clip of the president's speech at the United Nations. Here he talks about America's foreign policy and the Middle East, and we'll take a look at that and come back and discuss it.
Peace will not come through statements and resolutions at the United Nations. If it were that easy, it would have been accomplished by now. Ultimately, it is the Israelis and the Palestinians who must live side by side. Ultimately, it is the Israelis and the Palestinians, not us, who must reach agreement on the issues that divide them, on borders and on security, on refugees and Jerusalem. Ultimately, peace depends upon compromise among people who must live together long after our speeches are over, long after our votes have been tallied. That's the lesson of Northern Ireland, where ancient antagonists bridged their differences. That's the lesson of Sudan, where a negotiated settlement led to an independent state. And that is and will be the path to a Palestinian state. Negotiations between the parties. We seek a future where Palestinians live in a sovereign state of their own, with no limit to what they can achieve. And there's no question that the Palestinians have seen that vision delayed for too long. It is precisely because we believe so strongly in the aspirations of the Palestinian people that America has invested so much time and so much effort in the building of a Palestinian state and the negotiations that can deliver a Palestinian state. But understand this as well. America's commitment to Israel's security is unshakable. Our friendship with Israel is deep and enduring. And so we believe that any lasting peace must acknowledge the very real security concerns that Israel faces every single day.
And there's the portion of the president's speech talking at the United Nations about Israel as well as Palestine. endorsing the fact that there is a need for Palestinian statehood, and also endorsing the fact that both parties need to come together, also saying that Israel is definitely, there's a commitment there. When you look back at the president's speech and you look back at how he said it, very commanding, very forthright, do you back what he says?
Yeah, I think he struck the right tone. He said what is, to me, very logical, that the parties have to get together and negotiate. In other words, it's almost like the game of Monopoly with Go. You know, here the Palestinians really skipped Park Place and Boardwalk, and they skipped the negotiation, and they wanted to jump right ahead to the end of the game. Can't do that. The negotiations always envisioned that the peace process envisioned that the parties would get together, and they would work out all their differences. In the meantime, by the way, in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority has been trying to build the infrastructure of a state. This is very much overlooked in these discussions. You know, it's almost like, you know, how children have to go through infancy and then grow up and become adults. Well, you don't just build a state by adding, you know, state powder to water and have a state. You've got to build institutions. That's called state building. And Prime Minister Fayyad of the Palestinian Authority has been working with the Israelis to build these structures, to be able to take over security measures, to build confidence so that Israel has, I mean, this is a long-standing disagreement, and Israel is not going to relinquish its control over the West Bank unless it's confident that once it relinquishes that control, that it's not going to end up with another Gaza. And that is mortally, I just want to say, mortally and existentially dangerous to the existence of a state. And no state, and Israel is a state, a sovereign state, would give up its ability to survive just on a whim or on a wish that the party you're negotiating with is going to let you live in peace when the other party has not recognized your existence. This is the problem.
And one thing the president is very clear about was the fact that, listen, the United States and other nations will stand by on the sidelines, but ultimately is the responsibility of Israel and Palestine to really negotiate this out. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that he supported the president's speech, and even in having rocky relationships at times with the United States, he still was able to come forward and say, listen, this is a speech that I endorse.
Look, I mean, there is a domestic aspect to this as well. And President Obama is running for re-election. And the decisions that he makes on the international front also impact how people look at him on the domestic front and whether they're going to vote for him. And the truth of the matter is that there is a Jewish vote in the United States, and it's important, and he wants to get that vote. In order to get that vote, he has to be careful on how he takes positions about Israel. I mean, that's obvious. I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't realize. And so this election that took place between Turner and Weprin in Queens was kind of Obama is a smart politician, and he saw that election turned completely on which candidate was more pro-Israel. So he got that message, and people recognized the fact that he made that speech. Timing is everything. Gee whiz. In politics, president wants to get reelected. He's not, and by the way, what's the actual political benefit to President Obama in getting reelected if he pushes a Palestinian state? By the way, at the United Nations, which is a no-starter, because no one internationally backs this idea right now. That the point is the timing. Working your way up to it, working on the institutions, building the infrastructure, having the confidence-building measures that when you transition to the state and live in peace, that you're going to actually live in peace. That's the point. Because you're not going to transition to a Hamas-type Gaza, because all you're going to end up with is rockets, and this time, if it's coming from the West Bank, it will be aimed at and be able to reach the actual heartland of Israel in Jerusalem, and that is the heartland of Israel and other major cities. And from an existential point of view, Israel can't do that. Now, the point was Israel said, we sit down, we negotiate all of the points, Jerusalem, right of return, we do security, all these points. And by the way, here's another thing about a state. A state has certain sovereign rights. Once a state is proclaimed, it has the right to prevent overflight. It has all sorts of attributes that could actually lead to a war situation more so than the one that exists now. I totally agree with anybody that says the situation stinks right now. It's terrible. It's a terrible situation. But you have to work gradually to a solution. What the Palestinian Authority did was they skipped a lot of spaces, and they went right ahead. And the point is that in order to be recognized as a state, the United States would have to approve that in the Security Council, and the United States said they were not going to approve it. So
let's go back to what you said earlier. You talked about the possibility of picking up more votes, given the fact of being pro-Israel. Did the president accomplish that in this speech to the United Nations? Does he pick up more support?
Absolutely. I mean, Ed Koch endorsed President Obama and said, "I'm convinced." You know, it's a funny thing because in politics, things like that may seem to be meaningless, but they're very meaningful, because when people go to the polls and vote, they have who knows what influences them, but they think, "Oh, Ed Koch said so. Okay." So he's gotten a sort of a seal of approval from a leading Jewish politician in this country who said, "I'm convinced, I'm for Obama, and he's done what I think is appropriate." And frankly, you know, to me, by the way, besides looking for votes, it happens to be, in my opinion, you know, the right decision at the right time. This is not the time to be proclaiming a state, especially when we have so much flux, so much confusion in this area. We don't even know what the boundaries are. And I should mention that at one point historically, the Israelis offered Yasser Arafat 97 or 98% of the West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, the works, the whole Megillah, to use an interesting political term. And he rejected it because the Palestinian Authority needs to accept the fact that Israel is there to stay and it's going to exist, and side by side a Palestinian state, absolutely fine. If that Palestinian state will be demilitarized, will not be able to bring aggressive military action. Now, what would be the logic of setting up a state that would then become a belligerent, which would frustrate the abilities of the US and Europe and the other countries in the region to have stability? I mean, right now, there's a sort of stability. It's not great. I agree with you. It's rocky, but at least it's not a war.
Where do we see things going in the near future? Because we're getting ready to wrap up, but where do we see things going in the immediate near future?
It's very hard to say. And what it really turns on is the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring. We call it the Arab Spring, but the Arab Spring isn't too springy.
Right.
Because what's happened is in Egypt, you know, we're not clear on who's going to take power there. In Libya, we have all sorts of people affiliated with Al-Qaeda taking power. In Syria, the government is falling apart. Throughout the Middle East, things are in flux. So we really don't know. So I think the answer to your question is uncertainty, and hopefully not what could be a very disastrous result if all the countries in the region change from, at least they were autocratic countries, autocratic but not belligerent, into belligerent countries. Then the whole region starts to explode, and we end up with the potential for regional, if not international, conflict. And the background of the whole story is Iran. Where is Iran going here? Because Iran supports, and that's an important point, they support Hamas, they support Hezbollah, they support Syria. They are the destructive mischief maker in the area. So the whole area is in turmoil. So I think also President Obama is vindicated by the fact that this is not the time to bring that point up until we fix all these and figure out where all this other stuff is going. We need to stabilize that, because then to put a Palestinian state in the mix, which could potentially become a belligerent and have all these other countries in the region become belligerents, you end up with another war, and that is not desirable, and that's a disaster. And I say we should pray for peace and hope that that never happens.
Take a quick break, come back and have final comments from Mark Meyerowitz and myself when we return right here on Perspectives.
Here at Channel 7, it's our job to keep you informed about the issues and events that are important to you. Since 1920, the League of Women Voters has followed a similar mandate. Their goal? To improve the system of government through education, information, and action. If the issues aren't clear to you, if you want to make a difference in your community, if you want your voice heard, the League of Women Voters can help. Be part of the team that makes democracy work. Join the League of Women Voters of New York City.
And we're back here on Perspectives. Darren Jaime here with you. We're talking about the relationship between the United States, Israel, and Palestine. What was fragmented might be even more fragmented after the president's recent speech at the United Nations. attorney, political analyst, and Professor of SUNY Maritime, Mark Meyritz, has been sharing with us throughout the course of the show. And as we said, things it's just pretty much up in the air. And as you said, Iran is pretty much the wild card in all of this, to say
exactly. I mean, we don't know what's happening there. We know that they're trying to develop nuclear weapons. They've stated that their target, if they get a nuclear weapon, is Israel, which would be the Armageddon of the world. It would be a disastrous situation. See, we don't know where that goes. We don't know if they become nuclear, whether there's going to be retaliation by the United States or Israel to take out those nuclear weapons, and what does that mean for the region? Right. So the whole region now it's almost like Pandora's box, which you read about the story. It was all in a box. You had Mubarak, dictator, not a nice guy, stability. You had Assad, really bad guy, but stability. I'm talking about regional stability. You had Libya, Gaddafi, mentally insane, a nut, a malevolent individual. He's out of the picture. Some other people come up now. We don't know who they are. So the whole region is changing. It's morphing into something. We don't know what it is. And Iran is out there fomenting terrorism around the world with Hamas, with Hezbollah, and the fight between Sunnis and Shiites. It's so complicated. The point, I think, if it's the undercurrent of what President Obama, I think, was trying to do, not just to get votes, but also put this thing aside, go negotiate your thing, get something on the table that works, and then I'll shake hands with all of you on the White House lawn. But right now, too many things to arrange, too much complexity out there, and plus, I have to be honest, he's got an election, and the election is going to turn on jobs and domestic jobs and the economy. He's got a lot on his plate, and he can't solve this one right now. I don't think so.
Let's end on this note here. Question about the international. How much is the international really going to drive his political future right now? I mean, given the fact that a lot of people are applauding the speech, is it really going to play a major factor come 2012?
It plays no factor at all in a positive way, but it could play a major factor if something explodes in the Middle East. If the Middle East implodes, if Iran gets nuclear, all these things happen, that can be negative, because then it would impact on how he handles his leadership as an international leader of the United States, as a major superpower in the world. From a positive point of view, he's not going to get that handshake that you have in the White House lawn. He's not going to get a solution right now. It's too complicated. So his answer was, go guys, go negotiate, come back to me in my second term when I'm reelected, and then we'll have a nice meeting at the White House lawn. Right now, too many things to resolve.
Well, you get the handshake right here.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for sharing with us.
It was a pleasure.
Good having 30 minutes of talking discussion with you. If you want to catch Mark, you usually catch him around the fourth Wednesday, right here on Open. He discusses all the political stuff that's going on, as well as the international stuff on our front, that's hosted by yours truly. That's Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on BronxNet's Channel 67. That about wraps it up for this edition of Perspectives. We do thank you for watching. Be sure to share your perspective with somebody else. It just might make a difference in their life. And we encourage you, if you want to find out more about us, check us out on the Facebook page or hit us up on the website, www.bronxnet.org. For all of us here on the Set of Perspectives, Darren Jaime saying take care and stay blessed.